listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike. Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and sitting across from me is Mr. Brett Newcomb.
Glad to be back.
Glad to be back. That must mean that you were gone.
Well, I try to be gone as often as possible.
You do try to be gone as often as possible. And I am absolutely 100% envious because you seem to be in such an incredibly good place with your life and what you're doing.
You know, when you say things like that, though, it causes me to wait for the other shoe to fall. You know, I grew up in a world where nothing was predictable.
Yeah.
And I just learned to take the ride and enjoy it as best I can.
Yeah.
But you say stuff like that, it makes me cringe and like, oh crap.
Now, no, I know. I'm
it's
right
totally
there.
A non-rational response.
No, yeah, but I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
But it really does appear from the outside, and as I'm an outsider, but I know you pretty well, and you just seem to be so comfortable and genuinely enjoying retirement in a way that because we all hear horror stories, right?
Right.
People retire.
Well, I worked with a lot of clients that retired and
right.
didn't prepare for it, and then their whole world turned upside down.
Exactly.
They had to try to start new businesses or go back to work at old businesses, or couldn't balance relationships in their lives, couldn't figure out what to do with themselves. And I have to say, truthfully, I am just having the best ride. Life is good. Mm-hmm. It's good every day. It's not that there aren't problems and that
right.
you don't have pains and concerns and griefs. I was moved to tears today. I got an email message from a kid I'd gone to high school with, and he said, I reached out to me and said, I wanted to let you know his mother was our high school librarian. And she took me under her wing when I was a child and was doing a lot of acting out and had a lot of trouble at home and so on. And she sustained me and she guided me and she said, you are better than this and you can go here, there, and yon. So anyway, years passed and we lost touch. And I had gone to a funeral of a friend of mine at church, and we're all sitting around at the party afterwards talking about, guy, you know, if I'd known he was going to die, I would have said this to him. Mm-hmm. And I'd like for him to have known what he meant in my life. And I got to thinking about that. And I thought about Mrs. Carpenter. And I was talking to another friend of mine, and I said, you know, I wish I'd said this to her before she died. Mm-hmm. He said, oh, she's not dead. Mm-hmm. And so she was in her 80s. And I called her. And she remembered me. And we had a nice conversation, wow. And I was able to say, I wanted to say to you personally, what an impact you had in my life, what a blessing you were in my life before you were gone. Mm-hmm. And I just want you to know, you are still, because I became a teacher in large measure out of a reaction to what you provided for me.
Wow.
And I want you to know that you are still touching generations of children with your knowledge and your kindness and your behaviors that you don't even know exist. Mm-hmm. Because through me, your hand reaches out. So anyway, time has passed. She died. And several years have gone by. And this morning I got this email from her son who said, I just want to let you know, my mom had a major stroke before she died, lost track of many things. But she and I had several conversations about you and who you were in her life. And she remembered you, and she remembered that you called her and said those things to her, and it meant so much to her.
I have goosebumps.
And it made me cry.
Yeah.
And it just reading that message that Mrs. Carpenter knew that at the end of her life, that I valued her and loved her and respected what she had done for me and for others that I know of. Mm-hmm. And that I had a chance to say that to her. Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel really good about it. So.
Well, and I was going to say it makes you think. It makes me think when we have situations like that where somebody has a stroke and they lose however much of their memory, 75, 85% of their memory, but then she retained this memory. Is that because it was so incredibly powerful for her, or just because it was just random chance that those were the neural pathways?
Idea.
I know, and we'll never know.
We'll never know.
But that's amazing.
Yeah,
when you hear stuff like
thank
that.
God for her son to let me know that. You know, he could have had his feelings hurt
Sure.
or thought, well, who's this guy? Or,
Right.
But he was happy that she had a good memory to hold on to of a contribution of value in her life.
Right.
And of it being valued. So, I mean, that's great.
Well, wouldn't you always want your loved ones to have that? I mean, rather than a memory of a trauma, to have that.
Or a failing,
positive,
a loss.
Right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so anyway, I literally was moved to tears by that. So it's not that everything is always just sunlight and joy, but it's life, and you have to embrace it. You have to accept it. It's going to hurt you. You know, love always costs pain and loss, always. And so you take the risk to love somebody. You're saying, okay, I'm willing that I know I will get hurt at some point. So I don't know how we got there from starting. If I get to travel, I have a good life.
Yeah, and this wasn't where we had intended to go for today. But I just wanted to say one more thing. If we're going to close on this, I tell clients all the time that there can't be any hope without love.
I don't have any problem hearing that.
Yeah. But, when you think about people who are hopeless, has there ever been an example that you can think of where a person was hopeless but felt loved? And I would say probably not. And have you ever thought or experienced someone who had a lot of hope that didn't have love in their lives? And I would say probably not. So it seems like that those things, that hope is dependent on the perception, at least, of love.
I don't know if I'm on the same track you're on. What I'm thinking about are people that sacrifice themselves, like soldiers in the battlefield, that sacrifice their lives willingly, freely, for the sake of the people they're with on their team or in their family.
I think that's love.
In some situation. And it may not be what we would typically think of as I love you or I love my wife or my son, but I'm willing, because I have all these blessings in my life, to sacrifice myself for the sake of them so that other people can have them. And it's not so much a thought out thing. I don't think in that moment you have the chance to think about, jumping in front of a bus and grabbing a kid in the street that's not even your kid, because you might be able to save him, even though you're at risk. And people do that reflexively. And thank God that they do.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a form of love.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that wasn't really what we were going to talk about. So, but actually, I love that discussion. So that's obviously, as I am wont to say, it's something that we should come back to, because I think it is an important concept. But what we wanted to talk about was something that I have been studying off and on for almost a decade now. I used to teach psychopharmacology when we were working at Webster University, and when I was teaching that, I was very much had my finger on the pulse of the pharmaceutical industry and its influence over the way in which we do specifically psychology, psychiatry. We've kind of today looked at some articles that expanded that into medicine, but the pharmaceutical industry actually has a tremendous impact on the way we do healthcare in the United States. And I don't think that would be a surprise to anybody.
And I don't think you can limit it to psychiatric medicines. I think all medicines, doctors, clients, customers, patients, however phraseology goes, are impacted by that, but by what they produce, by how they sell it, by how they monetize it and make their profits out of it. There are so many contributors that people. I simply think about, I need a medicine. I've got a symptom. I've got a pain or an ache or a cough or something. I call my doctor. My doctor says, you got a pain or an ache or a cough. Here, I'll write you a prescription. I go to the drugstore and get it and go home and take it, and hopefully it makes me feel better. That's the limit of that is pretty much the limit of my concern. I may get involved with concerns about how the insurance company messes with me. I got a phone call. My wife and I were just in South Carolina traveling, and I got a phone call while I was gone, and it was from Walgreens. It comes up on my phone, it's Walgreens. And so I took it. Typically if it said unknown, I wouldn't take it. But the gal on the other end of the line is like, hey, I work at Walgreens, and I'm calling on behalf of Walgreens and your insurance company because we have noticed that you take 2 prescriptions and you don't take a third one. And typically, people that take these two
Take this other one.
need this other
Yeah.
one. And so we're thinking that maybe you want to take this other one.
Sure you do.
And I got really upset about that. I said, you're practicing medicine without a license. You're not my doctor. I mean, you have my records because you're my pharmacy and my insurance company,
Right.
but you aren't involved in the medical decision
Yeah.
making. You just decide to pay and provide, what you're told to provide. And I said, and she said, but the data shows that within 5 years,
Right.
I said, within 5 years, my doctor will notice it. I said, she's already checked for this, and I don't have an issue with it. I don't need the medicine. We've made this decision together, and I don't want you calling me about this. If I need you, I'll call you. And so then I started thinking about how many old people, because I'm old, and I know lots of old people.
Right.
How many old people are getting these phone calls and then jacking their doctor up and saying, I need this prescription.
Right.
And then that moved me into talking about and thinking about all the ads on television for medicine where they show butterflies and soft sunsets and happy children and old grandpas that didn't die of a heart attack yesterday and or cancer or whatever it might have been they didn't die from. And because they had this medicine. Call your doctor and ask if this medicine would be good for you. And I just get so upset about that because it's the extreme end of what you're talking about today when you say the medicine's impact on the delivery, the understanding, the approach to treating various illnesses, including psychiatric illnesses.
Well, and that for me, what really, really drove this home is that the AMA itself says that, according to their research, that roughly 83 to 85% of all pharmacological education is being dispensed by the pharmacy industry.
Yes, and then you have to, ancillary investigation is what is the impact of that industry on the decision making of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, because you have to do research and get approval and licensure, ownership, copyright for a particular medicine that you make. Then you get control all the profits that come from it, and you get to market it. And when the time frame for your licensing runs out, then you have to go back in and make a one molecule change or something, so you have something different.
Right.
And then you get a new license.
Right.
And that way you can control the market. But that's why insulin costs $6,000 a month. And people are dying because they're trying to stretch out their insulin usage because they can't afford the drug. And the drug companies are going like, well, gosh, that's really a shame.
But we could make insulin for 38 cents.
Right.
But we don't.
We don't.
And
because we own it, and,
Right.
and
we don't
in
have
a capitalist environment, we have the right to make a profit,
Right.
as much profit as we can make.
Right.
So,
and what they say then is, well, but we're not going to be invested in making that new cancer drug
Right.
if we can't jack up the price on the insulin.
Right.
And so if you want these new cancer drugs, then you got to be okay
if you don't
with
cover
this.
the nut over here, then we're not going to have the money
Right.
to invest in these new things.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's really, really troubling for me. It's troubling for me in medicine. It's troubling for me in psychiatry because we have a philosophy in Western medicine, in Western society, that we should go to a medical doctor and that medical doctor should treat us. I would argue that when you go in to see a doctor and you describe a constellation of symptoms, that he is going to find a treatment for you. It's extremely rare to go to a doctor and for the doctor to say, I have no idea what's going on. The tests all say nothing's going on. I'm not going to do anything for you. Almost always, and I'm not going to say ubiquitously 100% of the time,
Right.
but I would argue that most of the time, the doctor's going to find a treatment for you.
There might be a pill for your skepticism.
Exactly. Well, there probably is.
Or a drink. There's some kind of chemical
I'm
alteration that we
sure
could do
there is.
to fight that.
Right.
Yeah. Let's give you this drug.
And so doctors aren't motivated to say, I think this might be psychosomatic. Psychosomatic means that it's created in your mind, but it manifests as real in your body. I think this is psychosomatic, or, even more bluntly, I don't think there's anything wrong with you. I think you're a hypochondriac. Doctors aren't going to say that. And so whenever people feel any kind of distress, they're motivated to go and seek this medical advice. The medical advice is being informed by the people who are running the drug companies.
I read the same literature, and I see that that's an argument that has a lot of foundation. But I also see a lot of doctors going to a lot of conferences to learn new things that are not being handed information by the drug companies, that are not being given cash payouts. Here are 500 sample packs of our painkiller, and here is the reason why this one's better than any others. So give this pain when you get somebody that's in pain, give them this one. And doctors do that, and they used to get paid for it, and they still do in some way. I mean, we read an article this morning, said they found in the last year over 700 doctors receiving in excess of $1 million from pharmaceutical companies to market specific drugs, to push specific drugs.
And I'm going to put links to all of that information. There's going to be several articles that are going to be here, because I want people to know, we're not just spitting in the wind. This is stuff that is actually well documented. But I hear your point, and I
go to two or three medical conferences a year where I meet hundreds of doctors who are trying to say a new approach to medicine, which is to say, we want to individualize medicine. We want to find, for instance, when you go to the pharmacy and you buy drug X, and any particular name, it's a mass-produced product. One size fits all. If you got this symptom, you get this drug. That's what you take. Well, most of the medicines that have been approved by the FDA and that are out there were done on research on men only. Women were not allowed to be in the research pool because they might be fertile, and that could create complications.
Sure.
And so until the last 8 years, they didn't put women in the research pools because they couldn't figure out how to protect against that. So a prescription of a drug for a woman has a different impact on a woman than it does on a man.
Absolutely.
But there's no data on that in the norms that the lab tests use to say, well, where's your blood pressure, where's your sugar count, where's your heartbeat, all these things. And so these doctors are trying to say there are ways to figure out what an individual person, male or female, needs, and have a medicine made at a compounding pharmacy for that individual person to the precise parameter that they need. And mainstream medicine and the FDA seem to be working together to shut down compounding pharmacies because they don't want them, because it's too much competition. Too many doctors are saying, well, and then you get to the issue of off-label medicine, off-label usage. The FDA says this is the drug that you use for headaches, but doctors find that this same drug will solve insomnia.
Right.
So they say, well, take this drug, it'll help you sleep.
Right.
But that's an off-label use. It's legal, but they don't like it. They, being the pharmaceutical industry and the FDA, don't really like that. They just haven't found a way to stop it.
And I'm willing even to go as far as to say that I believe that 99% of doctors are motivated sincerely and genuinely with good intentions. So I'm not saying that this is being driven by the doctors, or that the doctors are wittingly investing in some kind of scam.
No, neither one of us are saying that.
Yeah.
The doctors have an impossible situation. The insurance companies are basically saying you have to see a new patient every 7 minutes. And the government says, well, you have to use this EMR. You have to use this because of the HIPAA laws. You have to use these computer programs to track all your data, and everything has to be in there. If it's not in there, then you're legally in jeopardy.
For everybody who's out, EMR is electronic medical record.
Right. And so there are restrictions on their ability to practice medicine. Very few doctors, unless you get into a boutique practice somewhere and pay a different kind of fee structure outside of the mainstream, normal, everyday American going to a doctor, it's getting harder and harder for you to find a doctor, especially if you live in rural America. And the age of doctors is aging out, just like most Americans are aging out.
That was
Sorry about that.
A good counterpoint.
Yeah.
Has the duck been replaced?
No, that was a different
that was a different alert. Okay.
Yeah, that's a different thing. Well, technology.
I thought the duck had learned how to play the piano.
I was hoping. We've been practicing, but it hadn't worked yet. Anyway, so doctors are getting older too, and so it's getting to be harder and harder for us to find physicians, and the physicians that we find have larger and larger practice populations. And so if you just have an ordinary cold or an everyday illness, and you want to get in to see your doctor, it may be, unless you're in a medical emergency, then they say, well, go to the doc in the box, don't go to your doctor, or go to the emergency room. You may be 6 months out. I don't know right now, 6 months from now, if I'm going to have headaches and a runny nose.
Sure.
So the whole system is changing, but part of why it needs to change has been this involvement with the pharmaceutical industry and the insurance industries in setting up their formularies to control the focus of what doctors have access to and do in order to prescribe medicines and make a profit off those medicines.
I'm agreed with that. I used to take a drug called decongestine, which was a decongestant that was used to treat allergies, and it was perfect. It was a fantastic medication, and eventually what ended up happening is that I had to transition over to Zyrtec, which is actually a different molecule and doesn't work as good for me. But the reason that I had to transfer off is because decongesting decongesting is discontinued. It is no longer produced anywhere on the face of the planet, and the reason is because it only cost them about 37 cents to make a pill. They were only charging me $5 for a prescription. They couldn't, so the insurance, the pharmacy could make them profit because they could charge me $5 for something that cost them 37 cents.
You could go to a compounding pharmacy and have them make that for you.
Well, I was getting it from a compounding pharmacy. I was ordering it from Canada for a while, a compounding pharmacy there, but they stopped making it because
they couldn't get the ingredients.
And so this medication that is completely effective and actually was something that I prefer to the existing medications that are on the market today, I can't obtain because it's no longer produced because it wasn't profitable enough.
Yeah. Well, I have another horror story. 2-3 years ago, my doctor has me on a thyroid medicine, Armour Thyroid. And so I take that every day, small dosage, to make my thyroid work the way it's supposed to work. So my insurance company doesn't have Armour Thyroid on their formulary.
Sure.
So they have a different kind of thyroid, but it doesn't work on me. We tried it. So I say, well, I'll pay for it because I got to have it. I mean, I want to have it, and so I'll just pay for it. And it's an old, cheap drug. It doesn't cost a whole lot of money. So I'm willing to pay for it. My insurance company, without my knowledge or permission or speaking to me in any way, contacted my doctor and wrote a letter and said, we see that you're prescribing this Armour Thyroid for this patient, me. And we're wondering if you are aware that that is not the standard of care, which is a legal scare word for doctors.
Right.
If they're not practicing standard of care medicine, they're likely to get sued by somebody. We're wondering if you're aware that that's not standard of care practice for elderly gentlemen, meaning me, because I was old.
Yeah.
So my doctor calls me. So I got this letter from your insurance company. This is what it says. What do you want me to do about it? I said, write them a letter and tell them to mind their own damn business. I'm not asking them to pay for it. They're not involved in this conversation at all. Tell them to go away. So she did.
That's amazing.
It's unbelievable.
So I know we got to wrap this up, and I don't know. For me, I feel like my takeaway message, I do know what my takeaway message is. The takeaway message for me is, and then I'm going to let you have a takeaway message, but my takeaway message is that I want people to be aware that their doctors are being educated by the pharmaceutical industry predominantly on the medicines that should be used. And that's like Boeing being in charge of doing their own safety checks on airplanes.
How's that working for you?
Well, exactly. Yeah. And so I'm not saying that...
That's a question we ask in therapy all the time.
How's that working for you? And so I don't want to put anybody on alert. I'm not saying doctors are bad, because when I say these things in class, my students are like, are you saying doctors are bad? No, I'm saying I want people to be informed. You are a smart person. You have the right to make decisions for yourself. Don't be influenced because you see an animated cartoon on the TV talking about a great new medication.
Right.
You may need a medication, and I'm not saying that you don't, and I'm not saying you shouldn't take the medicines prescribed by your doctor. What I'm saying is, please be aware that a lot of that information is coming from the pharmaceutical industry that's producing those pills, and take it with a grain of salt.
Absolutely, and I have two takeaways. One is similar: be an informed consumer to the best of your ability. Be aware that there are other agendas and other hands in the mix, and see if you can try to figure out where they are. And the key part of that is find a doctor that you trust, have a good relationship with them. The other message or takeaway that I would like for people to hear is, if you have somebody old in your life, if you're old, or if you have parents or grandparents that are still alive, please be aware of their vulnerability to this kind of
Absolutely.
messaging and manipulation. They get scared. They spend money. They make appointments they don't necessarily need.
And their bodies metabolize the drugs very differently.
Yes, amen. So to the degree that you can be an informed consumer for your mother's sake or your elderly neighbor's sake, please help them too.
Absolutely. So hopefully this was informational for people. Remember, the music that appears on Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue, and we thank him for his efforts. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.